Hello and welcome to Easy English with Mr. Chris. In this lesson we're going to be looking at the 15 fumble rules of grammar. Now this word fumble rules is probably a new one to most of you, so let's just have a little think what they are. So these fumble rules were a set of rules about using grammar created by journalist William Safire in 1979 and published in the American newspaper The New York Times. And what these fumble rules do is that they give advice about good grammar. But as a joke within these rules, they contain the mistake that they're actually talking about. So within the rule, the mistake is displayed and shown as a way of really reinforcing that point. Hopefully this will become clearer as we look through these 15 fumble rules. Now we can see these fumble rules here in detail. We're going to go through each one of these. And these are also available in the on the YouTube page as well, or you can take a screenshot now to refer to them as we go through. And so what we'll do is we'll look at each of these fumble rules in turn, analyze the particular problem which William Safire means by the fumble rule, and then correct it. And then through doing this we'll hopefully learn a bit about how we can use grammar more effectively in our speaking and in our writing. So the first fumble rule was to avoid run-on sentences. They are hard to read. Avoid run-on sentences. They are hard to read. So this phrase, a run-on sentence, is a common problem that many learners and users of English face, where one sentence collides into another. The two sentences crash together and there's nothing between them. So to avoid these kind of sentences, there's two things that you can do. Either link the parts properly together, or else divide them into two sentences. So you can link them or you can divide them. And if we were to do this with the fumble rule, we could say avoid run-on sentences because they are hard to read. So we're linking those two parts with because, we're giving the reason. Or we could say avoid run-on sentences, full stop, they are hard to read, full stop. So we divide that one sentence into the two different parts. Second fumble rule, don't use no double negatives. Don't use no double negatives. Again, a common problem with many users of English. The rule here, if there's already a negative in a sentence, for example, don't, then don't use another one within that same sentence. It's confusing and it doesn't really work properly on a language basis. So what you can do instead is to use a positive form the second time around. So for example, don't use any double negatives. Don't use any double negatives. We've changed that second negative word into something positive. The third one is to what you could also do in this situation is to rewrite the sentence in a positive way. So what you could do instead is to say use only a single negative. So rather than using the negative form there, use only a single negative. Third fumble rule, verbs has to agree with their subjects. Verbs has to agree with their subjects. The problem here is that the subject is plural, so the auxiliary verb also should be plural. So if we look here, verbs is plural, but has is a singular form, the third person singular form of the auxiliary verb have, which doesn't work. They don't balance together. The subject and the verb are unbalanced. So what we have to do here is to change that to say verbs have to agree with their subjects. So rather than using the third person singular form, use the third person plural form. Fourth one, use the semicolon properly. Always use it where it is appropriate and never where it isn't. So we can see here the semicolon is being used incorrectly within this particular fumble rule. Semicolons, colons, commas, full stops, often very source of a lot of confusion for users and learners of English. The key thing to remember is a semicolon separates independent clauses within a sentence. So this means it's more like a full stop than a comma. So a semicolon is closer to a full stop than it is to a comma. So to correct the sentence here, use the semicolon properly, semicolon. Always use it where it is appropriate and never where it isn't. If you look at the use of the semicolon there, we could replace that with a full stop and the sentence would still make sense. But it doesn't work if we replace it with a comma in that particular example. Number 5, reserve the apostrophe for its proper use and omit it when it's not needed. So the apostrophe, that little mark, which we often see in English. 2 reasons why we use it in English. Apostrophes are used to show missing letters, so where we are leaving a letter out, and the second way is for possession. And in this example here, they're the wrong way round. They've used them the wrong way round. So what we need to do instead, reserve the apostrophe for its, its, proper use, and omit it where its, it apostrophe s, not needed. The first one, the first its, is possessive, its proper use. The second one, it is. The apostrophe there is used to show a missing letter, a contraction, and so those 2 uses needed to be switched around. Number 6, no sentence fragments. So a fragment means a small part, something which is unfinished, and a sentence fragment means a sentence which is not complete. So every sentence in English needs a subject and a verb, and that sentence we just saw didn't have that, but we can correct it by saying, for example, there should be no sentence fragment. So we add the verb into that to make it sense. Number 7, avoid commas, that are not necessary. So again, commas, like semicolons, are often misused in English, and they are tricky. And if we go back here, in some relative clauses, we do need a comma, but in some we don't. It depends on the information which comes after the noun that it is describing. So in this example here, the that are not necessary is a core part relating to commas. It's an essential part of the information, therefore we don't use a comma. Where the information which follows is additional or extra or not central to the noun which comes before, then we can use a comma. But in this example, the comma is not needed because that information which comes afterwards is crucial to understanding the word commas. So in our correction, we can just get rid of it in that example. Okay, nearly halfway through then. So number 8, a writer must not shift your point of view. So a writer must not shift your point of view. Again, the problem here, we need consistency. The subject, writer, is in the 3rd person, but your is a 2nd person pronoun. So we've got a 3rd person and then a 2nd person. So it's not balanced. So to correct that, we should say a writer must not shift his or her point of view. So his or her is a 3rd person pronouns. We can use them there. So a writer must not shift his or her point of view. Number 9, don't overuse exclamation mark. Bang, bang, bang. Okay, so exclamation marks, generally 1 is enough. And really, even when using 1, depends on what type of writing that you're doing. So in less formal types of writing, exclamation marks are more common. In more formal, more academic kinds of writing, then you would find them much less. But definitely in anything that's reasonably formal, 1 is absolutely sufficient, but generally speaking a full stop would be more appropriate. Number 10, hyphenate between syllables and avoid unnecessary hyphens. So we can see 2 hyphens being used there, both incorrectly. Again, hyphens are only used in specific circumstances, specific situations in English. I have done a separate video on this, so if you're interested in that, I would recommend going to watch that. And number 11, write all adverbial forms correct. Write all adverbial forms correct. So often people mistake, confuse adjectives and adverbs, but these two parts of speech, these two word classes, have very different functions. So adjectives are used to describe nouns, adverbs give more information about verbs, generally speaking. They can give other information about adjectives or other adverbs as well, but generally that's the distinction. Adjectives go with nouns, adverbs go with verbs, and adverbs generally end in ly. So think of, quickly, slowly, etc. These adverbs, it describes a verb, they end in ly. So what we would need to do here, write all adverbial forms correctly. Correctly is relating back to right at the beginning of the sentence, so it is working as an adverb rather than an adjective. 12, don't use contractions in formal writing. So as I mentioned just before, a contraction where we use the apostrophe to show a missing letter, as in the example don't here, what we should do there instead is to write do not. So because a contraction is generally a feature of speaking or informal writing. So do not use contractions in formal writing. 13, just 3 to go. Everyone should be careful to use a singular pronoun with singular nouns in their writing. Now this is an interesting one. When William Safire wrote this in 1979, this would definitely have been incorrect, because everyone there is a singular pronoun, but there at the end is a plural pronoun, a third person plural. But nowadays, as language has become more gender sensitive, so we don't use necessarily his all the time, we can say his or her, but often there is used as a third person singular pronoun. So where we don't know if the person we're talking about is male or female, there is used as a third person singular pronoun. Now this isn't always agreed upon, people do things differently, but it is interesting to note that when William Safire wrote this particular fumble rule, it would have definitely been incorrect, but nowadays there is more sensitivity towards this kind of writing. Number 14, one word sentences, eliminate. One word sentences, eliminate. Again, linking back to something we said before with sentence fragments, every sentence needs a subject and a verb. So what we could say here is just eliminate one word sentences. And the last one, capitalize every sentence, and remember, always end it with a full stop. So as we can see here, there's no full stop there, and the first word of the sentence is not capitalized as it should be. So again, when writing, especially in more formal forms of writing, following sentence rules and conventions. Now again, compared to when William Safire was writing, nowadays there are many more uses of social media, informal forms of writing, text messages, etc, etc. Those sorts of rules are fluid in some situations, but still, if you're doing a more formal piece of writing, a letter, essay, etc, etc, following those rules and conventions is the best thing to do. So again, that's how we would correct it. Okay, so those are the fumble rules. Again, just to remind you, these were the 15 fumble rules that William Safire wrote, and then we can just look at the corrected forms that we've looked through today. So a couple of them, number 1 and 2, we can see there are 2 different ways of doing that. So I hope that was of interest to you, and see you again soon. Thank you very much.